Welcome back. I was working on a different project earlier, a little more related to my usual fare and the topics that I typically cover, socialism and, government intervention. But I think it's appropriate at least to give some perspective on my experience growing up, what 9/11 meant for me. Also, a couple other topics, not to just dwell on 9/11. I've had kind of a topsy-turvy day. I had an evaluation at work, um, so I heard a lot of criticism back at me that I was kind of expecting. So, you know, it's been sort of a day that was conspicuous in that it was ordinary, um, because I remember the first 9/11 when it was really 9/11. It was obviously a huge deal, and then a year afterwards there was the memorial service. Every year it was progressively less important for people to be introspective about what happened that day. Um, so briefly, when I got word, when I was notified that something was happening, I was in my earth science class. It was 10th grade. This was the class where all the stoners were. And yeah, it was a surreal experience. I didn't know what the hell was going on. It only dawned on me, just like with many people, that it was a terror attack after the second plane hit, because with one plane, you never really know. I mean, then of course there was the one that landed in the Pentagon, was flown into the Pentagon, and another one in Pennsylvania. Um, I have to say that given the past year and given everything that's been going on, um, I'm open now to other ideas about what happened on 9/11 in terms of whether there were, what are the real results of it. There's a lot of talk. There's one of the creators that I watch. His name is Lionel. Has a lot of deep and I'd say obsessive theories about 9/11, but that's not as annoying as it can be. Understandable, because that all started with the JFK assassination. There's plenty of people that now know that an event like 9/11, it's very difficult to believe that it happened and that the federal government like let a ball into the net that was of such a size. It was very it was a very long process for me to realize that yeah, maybe we really do need to take a deeper look. Now, am I able to go and really state categorically that I don't believe that what the government version of what happened didn't happen? Can I say that that's my opinion? I can't yet, because honestly, I've kind of let the topic swim away from me, and I focus on other things. And I don't think everybody has to focus on the same issue. Some of the people that are so obsessed with 9/11, they've developed their own delusions, and Lionel talks about it on his channel, Lionel Nation, which, by the way, you should check out. He has a few um, strange beliefs, in my opinion. Excuse me. But the point is that uh, being over skeptical is better than being over gullible. And that's really the lesson from 9/11. What really changed, regardless of who committed what and why it happened, because I do believe that Al Qaeda had definitely a major hand in it. I don't believe a lot of these conspiracy theories that it was created by George Bush or by the Jews or whatever. Well, some of these I'd say that they're concocted out of whole cloth. People they'll shoehorn the facts, just like with the Russia investigation. They'll try to craft the facts in order to suit the narrative that really jives with their viewpoint. Now, I think to a certain extent, everybody does that. But with events like 9/11, it's the same thing. Whether you talk about 9/11 or the Kennedy assassination, or the death of Jimmy Hoffa, or the Oklahoma City bombing, there's so many people that have just divergent opinions just for the sake of framing it in the context of their divergent opinion on everything else. But what really changed on that day, I'll tell you what. I remember that before 9/11, the idea that America could be faced with an existential war, one that shook to the core the fundamental soul of this country. I don't think that back then it really didn't even occur to me. 9/11 was a transitional moment. I remember that day. I wasn't like some of the people that I'd heard of that they got emotional. It was like, they started crying. But yeah, I think I did get very steamed about it. I thought it was an attack on this country. Until then, I'd really not thought about what being an American is. I'd kind of been sinking into contentment, and that's what the 90s were about. The run up to 9/11. It was a society that you could have everything at your within reach, and it hasn't diminished since then. Obviously, technology's made that even more so, but people were adapting to a reality that they believed would include a world without conflict, and that's something that 9/11 proved wouldn't happen. Now, whether you believe that it was, for the accepted reason that Al Qaeda and Islamic terrorism are trying to overthrow the West, or if you believe in some of the other theories, I think you'd have to agree with that. The United States is under existential threat, and the prescriptions for solving that are very different. But in the 90s, before 9/11, people didn't think about that at all. It was taken for granted that with the fall of the Soviet Union, and sorry, I'm so tired, guys, but with the fall of the Soviet Union and the advent of the dot-com era and the information revolution, people didn't think that there would be wars like this, that there would be basically a global war on terror. It was thought of in some corners that terrorism had faded away with the end of the Cold War, because people thought of terrorism being a state-sponsored thing, like the Soviet Union used to do. They used to fund several groups that engaged in terrorist acts. Well, it seems as if they forgot that some of the states that finance it, they have no reason to stop financing it. The Arab states and the Gulf and the Iran, for different reasons, they support certain groups. And that was a very different era before 9/11. You would just see people. I remember there was a lot more of those naturalist people, the people that would go out on hikes and they would eat their trail mix or whatever. That was like more in vogue before 9/11. The people that were looking inward to America, trying to get more of a this was the left at the height of its success. Ironically, under Bill Clinton, a politician who pursued policies that were anything but leftist. It was a disaster in the end for the average American when, I think the disaster was amplified by the fact that Americans were not prepared after the 90s for this shock, this atrocity that was the bombing of the world, or the flying of the planes into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. People thought this is insane. This is, well, unfortunately, people have to know that if this was Islamic terror, which I think I accept that it is. Who else facilitated it? I don't know, but it was Islamic terrorism, and people have to accept that the specter of Islamic terrorism in the United States has been in existence since well before 9/11. You should be aware that there is this guy Steve Emerson who made tapes back in the 90s, these very rough cut tapes where he would go to these conventions, the Islamic conventions, and he would try to blend in and get literature and whatever. And he's kind of the father of the anti-jihadi community. Some would call it an Islamophobic community. Well, whatever it is, this person he was working well before 9/11. He was claiming that the motives of these people, the perpetrators of the first World Trade Center attack, which happened, I think, in either 92 or 93. He said that those people would be back. There's no such thing as fighting them with the power of the law, because eventually they seek to upend the very rule of law. So that's my thought. Not a very emotional day for me, and for most of the people I know. It's breathtaking how quickly people forget. Now, for this interview with Steve Bannon, Steve Bannon, he was interviewed by PBS's Charlie Rose. Or no, it was 60 Minutes' Charlie Rose. I think he used to work for PBS, but I could be wrong. Charlie Rose was basically he played the same tune as I think it was named Steve Pelly interviewed Mike Cernovich. They want to make the guest look out to be a buffoon, and instead they show themselves to be a buffoon. You had them reading talking points about immigration that were based on the United States having a goal to be a multicultural society, and that commitment has already been made. Made by who? If every time there's a decision that goes wrong with liberals, whether it's a court ruling or the passage of a bill, they go up in arms and say, "Oh, we need to be heard. We need to be heard." Well, in this case, they didn't need to be heard. Okay, the Hillary Clinton crowd. I don't know what these people personally voted, but the hurricane cloud is now going through this liberal establishment, and the hurricane is, sorry about the pun. I'm kind of getting losing my train of thought here because I'm so tired, but the hurricane is Steve Bannon. He's blowing through all these media cocks, like the guy that was on yesterday. It was Charlie Rose. He's blowing through them so fast that they don't even know it. They try to set him up with a bunch of questions, and the most important response I think he gave was when asked whether Donald Trump is really disavowing I think it was xenophobia and bigotry. He said, "Yeah, that's beneath you, Charlie Rose," and it was a good line, because it shows that he's not willing to take the bullshit of the people that are so-called trying to interview him. So that's about all. I don't think I'm going to be able to keep going for the rest of the topics. But I think that 9/11, well, there's so many questions left, and I don't think it's disrespectful to start talking about ways to figure out some of the more technical aspects of the melting of the steel beams in the World Trade Center. Those things have to be explored to some extent. I'm not saying that we should be laser-like obsessed with them, But the Kennedy assassination was basically allowed to go through, and nobody investigated all the shady characters in there. We've just been told that it was a lone gunman. So I think it's the same idea. We need to talk about full disclosure and revealing what people knew back then, because if so, then if this is something that's on the record going that far back, I think that we're much closer to acknowledging that this society has become less free, and there's been spying going on maybe probably since the middle of the Cold War against American politicians, maybe even against the president himself. So have a good night. I know this video is a little jumbled. I'm basically fighting to stay awake. Have a good night, and leave your comments below.